Hey everybody, let's learn how to throw on the wheel. It might seem complicated, and there is a bit of a learning curve, but I'm going to try and break it down for you to make it nice and simple. I'll show you the tools you need, how to make your basic bowl shape, and how to make it nice and smooth. Then we'll finish up with how to break down and clean your wheel. Let's grab our tools. First, you're going to need a bucket for water. You only need a few inches of water, but it should be enough to dip your whole hand in. Next, we need a plastic wheel bat we never throw on the steel, a wooden potter's rib, a round yellow sponge, and one small sham. Make sure the bat is dry. You can hit it with some paper towels if you need to. Okay, let's get set up to throw. Leave the rib and the sham next to the wheel and toss the sponge in the bucket. Next, we have to connect the plastic wheel bat to the steel wheel head. Remember, we never throw directly on the steel. On the underside, you'll find two sets of notches. We use the wide set ones. You'll notice the edge has 3 raised dots. Those are very helpful when trying to line up these holes with the bolts on the wheel head. Line up the 3 dots with the bolt and press it down on one side. Once you have one side connected, it's a lot easier to find the other side. Pivot back and forth until you can find the bolt on the opposite side and press it down. If you did it right, you should get no wiggle. And double check to make sure that bat's nice and dry. Now let's grab a piece of clay. Get about a handful and wedge it up so it has a nice even consistency. I'm only using one hand since I'm holding my phone, but you can of course use both hands. Next, let's pack that piece of clay into a nice oval shape. Now let's take that oval and aim right for the center of the bat. I like to lay my hand down so I can see exactly where I'm aiming. And we're not throwing it from up high. Don't bring your hand over your head and pretend like you're chucking it down. This isn't Space Odyssey 2001. That's a little too crazy. You're just gonna pull back, give a little bit of momentum, and slam that thing right down in between your thumb and your fingers. Once the clay is stuck on that wheel, let's push it down to make sure it's really secure. This is also a good opportunity to press out any large lumps and make a more rounded form. That will make your throwing job a lot easier. Give the wheel a quick spin to see if anything stands out as lumpy or off center. Remember, the smoother and rounder we start off, the easier it'll be to get centered and stay centered when we start throwing. Now that your clay is ready, let's get you ready to throw. Scoot that stool in as close as you can possibly get to the wheel. You want to feel the splash pan on the insides of your knees. Next, let's tuck in those elbows. Jam those elbows into the space between your belly and your hips. Then, you'll lean over, locking your elbows in place. An extra little tip, we're always going to work with our hands connected to each other. On their own, each hand can be a little wobbly, but when working together, they tend to be stronger and more stable. Okie doke, let's finally switch this wheel on, shall we? Now, we don't want to go top speed. That's way too fast. But we also don't want to go super slow. I recommend turning it to top speed, then backing it off just a little bit. Then, remove your foot from the pedal. It stays locked in place, so you don't have to lean on it the whole time. Okay, let's start throwing. Wring out the sponge a bit first. You won't need a full sponge of water. Squeeze the water out into your hands holding the clay. This will build up a layer of slip and reduce the friction while throwing. Now it's time to pull those elbows in nice and tight. Our first step is to press with our palms. Put those palms right next to each other, and we're going to lean our body weight into the clay. This little forward push is going to counteract that extra wobble. Make sure you're keeping those elbows tucked in and not extending your arms. You just want to lean your body weight into your elbows. Our next step is to learn how to cone and dome. For this, I keep one elbow still and tight, and the other hand swings around the opposite side. My hands are going to squish in towards each other. This is not a palm-up karate chop. Do not do that. Instead, we're lightly turning our hands inward to compress the clay and make it get taller. The clay can't go through the bat, it can't go through our hands, so it's got no place to go but up. Once you start compressing that clay, make sure you follow it as it goes up. If you don't, the clay will separate into a top half and a bottom half, and you'll need to start again from step 1. So follow that clay as it gets taller, and get your hands closer and closer together. The motion should look something like this, with your palms slowly compressing toward one another. When you get to the top, let go nice and slow, just like this. Ta-da! On the contrary, letting go too quickly can cause a wobble, so always remember to let go slow. And there it is. Nice job. There's our cone shape. Next step, make this thing into a dome. Now it's not as simple as just pressing straight down. That motion tends to end up with a lot of wobble. So we want to remember the fundamental that a forward push will stop the wobble, and combine that motion with a downward angle. Essentially, we want a 45-degree angle push. Make sure your hands have some moisture and use the meat of your palm. I find that stacking one hand over the other makes you feel a little bit more in control. If you start to feel the clay start to shake, you can shift your hand to the forward push again to regain control. Then, simply slide back up to continue pushing down on an angle. And that should give you a pretty good dome. Let me show you one alternate technique for doming. Some potters prefer to wrap one hand around while the other pushes from the top. This is an option you can do as well. In this case, the hand wrapped around the outside is really just using the fingers to smooth out any small imperfections. The pushing down of the clay is still happening from that top hand. Next, we'll get our clay ready to open. We'll need to make our clay in the shape of a hockey puck. To achieve this, you want to press down on the top and in from the side at the same time. Let me break this part down. This is a similar motion to that first step when we were pushing with our palms. The main difference is that I now have one hand pressing down on the top. Now your hands are going to be dictating the large shape of the clay, but you can use your fingers for some small smoothing on those far edges while you're pushing. Again, I find it a bit more stable for one hand to hook onto the other. With the right balance of pushing down from the top and in from the side, you should end up with this nice hockey puck shape. Now, drop a finger onto the edge to peel away that excess bit of clay. We call that the clay skirt. Take that bit of extra clay and just stick it off to the side of your splash pan. Now, we're ready to open up the clay. Make sure your hands are covered with a layer of wet slip. There's a few different ways to go about this next part. You can use 2 thumbs or 2 pointer fingers or one of each. But we all start the same way, with your fingers in contact with the sides of the hockey puck. Next, rest your thumbs or pointer fingers into the top center of the clay. We're going to be leaning those top digits into the center of the clay. We're not pushing down like a drill. So remember, the correct motion is a lean. Okay, let's give it a shot. Fingers in contact with the sides, thumbs or pointers in the middle, and we slowly lean those fingers down into the center. Your outside fingers can push in just a little bit to take care of any slight wobble that might start to happen. The pressure you use with your fingers should be firm. Floppy fingers will cause a floppy form. Once you have a pretty good opening, release slowly to keep your form on center. The next step is to widen the opening. We're going to be pulling from the very center toward your body. First, lock your elbows in place. Then, place your thumbs or fingers at the very center, lowest point of your bowl. Firmly and slowly pull toward yourself. Once you have that opening a little wider, it's time to release your hands nice and slowly so you don't throw it off center. Next, let's make sure the middle is nice and flat. I press down with a finger and I support that finger with my other hand. I move from the center out toward the walls, trying to create a smooth, bump-free surface. At times, I'll press out from the inside and in from the outside simultaneously. My goal here is to make both the interior and exterior walls as smooth and even as possible by applying equal pressure. And I always let go nice and slow. Now that we have the clay open, we can reduce the speed of the wheel. When pulling up the walls, I like the speed of the wheel to be around 1/3 of what I use for centering. This tends to be more manageable and easier to control. Okay, let's pull these walls up. Make sure your hands are covered in a layer of wet slip. When pulling up the walls, we do not want loose fingers. Make sure your fingers are nice and strong, pressed together. You want both hands to be on the same wall, one on the interior and one on the exterior. At the lowest point of the clay, you want to press out with your inside hand and press in with your outside hand. You're going to lock that pinch in place and then slowly move that pinch up. Let's see how it looks when used on the clay. I'm now pushing in at the lowest point of the outside and pushing out on the lowest point of the inside. I haven't moved my hands up at all, and yet you'll notice that the bowl is already a little bit taller, and you can see the indentation from where I pressed my hands together. This is because the clay can't go through the bat and it can't go through my hands, so it's got no place to go but up. Now, if I once again lock my fingers in that same position, I'm creating a certain thickness between my two hands. As I move those hands up, the rest of the wall will become that same thickness. Your hands are strong and the clay is soft, so it has to imitate the shape of your hands. That's why it's so important that you lock those fingers in place. As the clay spins, you're forcing it into a consistent thickness and an even surface. Continue to repeat this process of pushing out from the inside and in from the outside at the lowest points and slowly pulling up to get those walls taller until you feel satisfied with their height. Once you're happy with the height of the walls, let's clean up a little bit more of that clay skirt. You can either use a potter's rib or you can just use your finger like I have here. This will make it easier to cut the bowl off the wheel and also easier to trim. As a final step, take your sponge and wring out most of the water. Do not wring it out inside the bowl. With light pressure, lay the sponge on the interior of the bowl. Just hold the sponge in one spot. You do not need to wipe the sponge around the bowl. The spinning of the bowl ensures you're touching all of the surfaces. Do the same for the outside of the bowl and the rim. As a final step, we'll clean out the rim with a small yellow sham. Make sure we soak this in water and then wring it out. If you don't have a sham, you can also use a rolled up piece of paper towel. Stretch your sham or paper towel over the rim of the bowl. A light pull downward with both hands will ensure that any excess slip is cleaned off that rim, leaving you with a smooth, satisfying edge. Finally, we can stop our wheel. Take a wire tool and drag it underneath your bowl. I like to leave this pottery to dry overnight on the bat, and then I'll come back the next day to do my trimming. So stop back to learn about how to trim once your bowl has become leather hard. Before you go, hit that like button and remember to subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for stopping in. Me, I am just an art teacher. Have a day.